Thank you so much. Fantastic panel, fascinating panelists, and really challenging discussion. Thank you so much for this. And let's see, everything that we say and that we do is obviously recorded. So for the past 16 years, Webit has been creating content and predictions, most of which happen and come true. So let's see how we move next. We have very important discussion on media trends 2022, not in 10 years, but next year in less than half a month. And if we don't count the Christmas celebrations, it is tomorrow. Now, let's see. Our panel is consists of truly amazing practitioners and industry experts. So I would like to introduce the first part of the Media Trends 22, which is Media Trends 22 and Review of 2021, which is moderated by Jonathan, founder at Workshare Consulting. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Hello, and welcome to this next panel on media trends of 2022 and a little of a retrospective look at 2021 at Webit Global Impact Week. I'm joined by a fantastic array of panelists today from Roku, STARZ, and the analyst and consultancy firm Omdia. In a moment, I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. But first, we're going to talk about things that have been surprising over the last year, things that are kind of emerging over the next few years, and of course, what this means specifically for the companies I have on my panel. So let's turn to my panelists and let them introduce themselves, starting with Maaz from STARZ.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maaz. I'm the CEO of STARZ in the Middle East and North Africa region. We are about a 7-year-old company, and we serve all of Middle East, North Africa, and Pakistan as a region.
Fantastic, thank you. And Maria, you're next on my Zoom window, so if you would introduce yourself, please.
Yes, hello, Jonathan. Thank you for inviting me at Webit Global Impact Week. This is in fact my second year at this event, which is really good. And I am Senior Research Director at Omdia, part of Informatech. So we are a consultancy, media research. We write lots of reports, numbers, doing lots of analysis of companies like STARZ Arabia or Roku. So I'm very happy to be with these two great companies today here discussing trends. So thank you.
And finally, Mike.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Mike Shaw. I lead the international ad sales team at Roku, America's #1 streaming platform, and now expanding rapidly across the globe. Very happy to be here.
Fantastic. So we had a quick chat before the panel, and we came up with some really interesting ideas today. So we're going to start with looking a little bit into the past, what happened last year with that huge explosion of streaming and of course live viewing, and what that means. Now, Mike, we spoke a little bit before, and you were talking about how that the next few years you'll be quite keen to build on what was essentially a sort of fast forward in the way that consumers are using streaming platforms. And if you want to introduce us to your chosen topic now, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jonathan. So for me, the emergence of streaming and what we saw in 2020 with the catalyst of the pandemic and people working from home has really not looked back. The amount of streaming we're seeing has really only built on that. And I think depending on which analyst you talk to, we've gained something in a kind of between 5 and 10 years worth of progress in literally 18 months in the extent to which content is now being distributed and consumed by consumers via streaming methods. And I think this is so disruptive to the media business in general, and also to the way that brands and advertisers reach consumers. I think we're in the point of really reshaping the way that industry looks. There's still phenomenal opportunities to talk to consumers on the big screen, but it's just being done through different players now, with lots more opportunities to bring data and targeting to bear.
Fantastic. You used the A word there, which of course means I need to call Maria in for a second opinion on this. So Maria, I know you guys have done a lot of research into consumer habits and how it's affected people. What have you seen around the same topic that's sort of surprising and interesting?
Surprising. The biggest surprise for me this year is to be 2 years after the pandemic and still being like that virtually, and still events being cancelled. So I wouldn't expect this to be the case. But as a result, this year we knew online will be growing. We thought it was going to be half the growth last year. But again, because we were again in a year where the pandemic is still around, it was a very healthy year for streaming online video again this year, with more than 150,000 additions, 150 million, additions in the year. So a lot of growth, also growth from both SBOT and ABOT and hybrid models. So many studios that they had an SBOT model, they realized it's good to introduce a second tier, including advertising. So there are more and more hybrid models. Discovery Plus in the US, HBO. So it looks like advertising is playing a critical role around the world, not just in some markets, I would say all around the world.
Of course. Sorry, please go on.
No, I was saying advertising important, will be important as well next year. And also very important this year, the role of partnerships. In December 2020, my prediction was 2021 will be the year of partnerships. And it has been more than ever. And next year it will be even more important. So we just finished a panel for IBC with Liberty Global and Netflix. And Netflix, as the #1 video streaming service in the world with more than 200 million subscribers, even them said we need partnerships, we need to partner with telcos, pay TV operators, or with new companies that are acting as aggregators, device manufacturers and others. So aggregation is key, partnering with companies that aggregate content is key.
I've got a few parts of that I'd love to drill down on, but if I could perhaps put a pin in that just for now, and we'll come back to it. Maaz, you know, we've been talking a lot about sort of more traditional, talking about streaming, more traditional streaming services. But of course, as STARZ Play, you're a bit of an old hand in that, and yet this year you've kind of been pushing the boundaries and perhaps a method that might be viewed by some as more traditional. I find that quite surprising. It would be lovely if you could elaborate on it. Sure.
So I think for us, the consumption for us tapered off in early 2021, in the beginning of the year, as lockdowns in the markets we serve started to ease. So that peak we'd seen in April 2020 started to ease off for the first, I would say, quarters of 2021, and then it started to build again in the summer, and it's continuing to build again. So I definitely think that I agree with Mike and Maria on the shift that's happened, and it's a permanent shift in terms of consumption behavior and consumption patterns, and that behavior shift is there to stay. In terms of what new we've been doing this year for us, there's a couple of changes we've made, or a couple of additions we've done to our service. One is we have recently launched linear channels. So that's live broadcast as well as live sports channels, both for football as well as sporting events. And then the second thing we see ourselves doing more of is becoming more of an aggregation platform in the markets we serve. So this year we launched brands like Discovery Plus, UFC, Golf TV on our service that rather than them launching themselves in the market directly to the consumer, they're choosing to coexist on platforms like us, which I think, to Maria's point, was the point about partnerships. You know, not everyone can flip a switch and launch a global service. I think everyone is looking for distribution partners.
And that's a great segue back to our partnership question. Maria, I've got a bit of a nasty question for you now on partnerships. We talked a little bit before. We know over the sort of last 10 years or so, partnerships have grown. They've grown from something which is quite, a meeting of frenemies to something that's a lot more beneficial for both parties in a really positive way. So I don't think it's controversial to say that that's happening. What I'd really like to sort of delve down on is from your perspective, Maria, because I know you have conversations with all these guys. How does that affect the power dynamic when those negotiations are taking place? I'll leave that with you to build on, I think.
That's a good question. Who has the power? Is the streaming video company? Is the pay TV operator or the telco? And I think depends who the two partners are. Also, same partner, like for example, Netflix, many years ago, many telcos, they were terrified with the idea of partnering with them. Are there competitors? What are we going to do? Why should we partner? Now, Netflix has a very powerful position in the partnership world. So obviously the deals they get with companies around the world, with pay TV operators and telcos, is not to be the same deal as smaller streaming video services. So who has the power? I think it depends on the brand, it depends on the company, what do they offer, and who the telco or the aggregator is. Again, in the aggregation world, as Maaz said, there are many companies aggregating content. One of the complaints from video streaming services is not all aggregators are the same. Some aggregators do not share the data of who's using our service. We don't get enough visibility on how the content is being consumed. So I think partnerships are becoming complex because everyone is getting married with everyone, and then comes complexity. So who gets the power? It depends a lot in both, but I would say it's very complex, and it's not the same partnering with a cable company than with Amazon, or I assume with Roku or other streaming video services. So maybe a question for Mike and Maaz as well. Who do they think in this negotiation?
Given that they're sitting at either side of the table in some respect.
Who has the power, Maaz?
Well, I think Maria said it right. It really depends on the brand. Clearly established brands like, Sky in UK and Netflix globally, they command a very strong position. And so I really think it's not by telco or cable company or the streaming company. It's more by who has a more powerful and a stronger brand position and more subscribers. And then when it comes to the streaming world, there's no one bigger than Netflix. So I agree with Maria. It really depends on the brand, but Netflix certainly has a very commanding position in every market they serve, no doubt.
I think that there's an interesting angle on this, and I could say this with from the position actually Roku grew out of the Netflix organization back in the day. But when we think about these partnerships, I think, Jonathan, you kind of described it right about this idea of it's that mix, the kind of the frenemy and everything before and beyond point that we're actually in, because I think we're still relatively early in the streaming ecosystem's evolution, and right now it's not a zero-sum game. The vast majority of these types of things ought to be able to be designed in a way that everybody shares in the upside generated by these partnerships. So certainly at Roku, when we go into these types of discussions, it's really around what is that fair value exchange for distribution to all of the households running the Roku OS in their house. But we also understand that a key part of our model is really around engagement, and that engagement is only partly Roku channel content. The vast majority of what's consumed on our devices is not the Roku channel itself. So we're dependent on those content partners that really make the streaming ecosystem work. For a consumer experience, they might talk about turning on their Roku, but they're turning on their Roku to watch amazing content, and that'll generally be what they talk about. So I think we're quite a long way from a very mature business model where somebody winning means somebody kind of net losing. I think there's a lot of sort of thinking that can go on beyond the zero-sum game area here. I think we've just concluded a not entirely straightforward multi-year arrangement with YouTube, for example, on the platform, and that is these discussions, they do get tough, especially when the the balance of power isn't very clear at all, and where maybe that one partner is trying to kind of lean on another one. And so I think if we get back to that roots of this idea of everybody winning and a genuinely fair value exchange across the board, then I think the streaming ecosystem can be very harmonious for years to come yet.
I think that point there, the phrase you use, fair value exchange, I think that's critical, and I'd like to sort of expand on that a little bit as well. You can draw a lot of parallels in the way that the streaming world is becoming similar to the sort of traditional broadcast and pay TV world of the past, with aggregation in its mainstay, multiple platforms, and sort of all these channels emerging, which reflect sort of generalist, thematic, and specialist, curators of content, much as the channels worked in the past. What's missing a little bit is the way that works in terms of remuneration. So typically in the past, if you've been on a platform and you are a paid for channel, you share part of that with your platform. Makes sense. Currently, that only applies if certain criteria are met. And typically, this is if the customer has signed up through that platform. If they're using that platform to view the content and they signed up elsewhere, often there is no remuneration. And that's very different to the past. I'm really interested in your guys' views on whether that's going to change. Is it possible for that to go the full circle, and for the power dynamic to shift in such a way that future deals that are done with SVOD channels reflect the same sort of carriage arrangements on a viewing basis and not on a subscription basis? A long and rambling question, but it's about how those negotiations could look in sort of five years' time. Who wants to take a stab at that?
Sure, I'll go first. I think, Jonathan, you're right, but I think one major change in the streaming world is the ARPUs are completely different, and how the underlying fixed cost is attributed to that entire value chain is very different as well, because it used to be that a cable company or a satellite broadcaster would take on the fixed cost of the satellite or that cable plant, and then that's over the next 10-20 years, that's how they would recoup that. And the ARPU was high enough where it left enough margin for different players in that value chain. This is the challenge in the streaming world, that your ARPU is so low relative to the cable companies previously, or the satellite packages we used to subscribe to, that you have very little to work with in that, very little margin to work with in that value chain. So I think that's one challenge. The second challenge is that from a consumer's point of view, the content isn't aggregated in one place. So that's why people are subscribing to 6 or 7 different, sometimes, services to get all their favorite shows and movies and live sporting events. So I think, the consumer finds that they're almost going back to paying what they used to pay for their cable companies, and whereas the different players involved in it are feeling that they're getting squeezed in this value chain between the margins. So I think in the long run, the industry will find its balance, certainly, because if you look around, streaming companies aren't really generating cash. Companies have been around for 10+ years, but they're yet to generate cash flows, positive cash flows. So I think eventually they will find their balance, but it's going to take time. And this is where the partnerships, I agree with Mike, although it's not a zero-sum game and the pie is growing, but this is where discussions are difficult, and you find some streaming players don't do any partnerships in certain markets because they find it's better for them to go to market directly. So that's so my concern is more about the ARPU and the margin stacking in this business, and how long is that sustainable. Meanwhile, the consumers are continuing to subscribe to multiple packages to get the content that they want. That's perhaps the challenging part.
It's a fairly comprehensive answer. Maria or Mike, do you have a particular opinion on that?
Well, so that I've got colleagues who work on the content business who would be able to articulate this far better than I will. But I will say that, Maaz, I think you raise a really interesting point about, and it does come back, Maria, to your partnerships angle. And I think we're going to get to a place in a few years' time where, as with any industry that's going through the explosive growth that we see, there'll be a bit of a shakeout. And that shakeout will be between those services that have launched and made it, those services that have launched and haven't been able to get to what they need to do and need to rethink the economics of their business. And I think for us, again, we're already looking at that as part of that content ecosystem, because who knows where it'll net out, but this idea of subscription fatigue must kick in at some point. Household budgets are not limitless, and actually we're probably going to go through a point over the next year or 2 years where households on average have got less disposable income than more, relative to maybe where they have been. And so we're going to see, from a content perspective, we expect to see more partners leveraging things like distribution through other infrastructure, in our case, the Roku channel. So the Roku channel, which is Roku's owned and operated media channel that contains, for example, the output of our Quibi acquisition from last year that's now been repurposed into Roku Originals, and we're recommissioning more of those. But it's also a home to great licensed content, and it's also a home to content sets from content originators who could have launched their own, for example, Plus service, but they don't see that as the way forward. They don't necessarily have the marketing spend to do that. They do want the captive audience for that great content. And so I think there's going to be a set of new opportunities, be it through aggregations, be it through things like the Roku channel, that we will actually see more types of content that serve those diverse audiences, Jonathan, that you talked about in the question, in future.
This is allows me to introduce a new topic, Mike and Maaz, because we're talking about consumer fatigue, and yes, according to the Omdia consumer survey in the US, they told us that 7 is that magic number. After 7 streaming video services, people do not want to get more. And it's not just a matter of how much they're spending, is to deal with so many services, because 7 included SBOTs, ABOTs, everything. We are tracking more than 5,300 video services around the world. 7 is a top number. So I'm going to introduce a bad word, P, piracy. Why piracy? Because again, I saw it increasing this year, and it's a bad trend, but it's a trend that will happen in 2022, because consumers are getting tired. Consumers that they do pay for content, they're getting tired not to know where the title is. I mean, recently in the last month, we saw people being upset, Discovery being removed from Netflix, fans were very upset, or even Maaz, your parent company, I mean, STARZ playing, not in Arabia, but STARZ play here in the UK. They had a series, Outlander, it was in Amazon. Now to watch it, you have to go to STARZ. So fans, consumers are speaking constantly, complaining about shows being removed from the platforms. They don't know where to watch them anymore, or titles that are available in one country and not in another. And as a result, piracy is increasing a lot. And again, many times, according to our consumer survey, people willing to pay for that content in illegal ways, but sometimes they said, and it was a quote, it's easier to find it illegally, or even more simple, I can find it illegally, I couldn't find it in my country, or I have to subscribe to 20 services in order to watch these 20 series. So that's a good topic. What do we think about piracy in 2022? And not just in the sports world, that obviously is an obvious one, but also in the world of TV series and dramas, and how is so many D2C launches and studios removing that content to keep it exclusive in the platforms is affecting also consumers.
I think I've seen your consumer survey on this, Maria, and I think it's also worth highlighting that the people, I think this is right, correct me if I'm wrong, because it is your data I'm quoting, the people who were most likely to pirate were also those spending the most money on content in the first place.
Correct. So it's people that are watching content, but maybe they saw that one title was available in the US, for example, and they couldn't watch it in this country because the deal was not closed and they didn't know what to watch it. Or they subscribe, again, sorry Maaz for putting Outlander on the spot, but imagine they subscribe to Amazon Prime to watch Outlander, and now they realize they have to watch, to subscribe to STARZ. I appreciate why STARZ is doing it. Obviously, they want to drive new subs as well. But for consumers, it starts becoming complicated. What to subscribe, where, how many services do I need? Can someone aggregate it all? So just make a payment and all my favorite shows. So I don't know, Maaz, if you will agree, or Mike, if this is a problem you are seeing increasing.
Yeah, look, it is definitely a challenge, and like you said, Maria, it's going to get worse, right?
It's getting worse.
It's getting worse because as Disney launches its own Disney Plus service around the world, the HBO Max rollout happens, between these two majors, you're going to have a lot of content that'll be removed from cable companies, as well as streaming platforms that were previously licensing the content. So it's definitely going to get worse. I think added to this is the convenience factor, like you said, Maria, is that the piracy apps are available on app stores, and people just download them, and their user interface is as good as any other streaming service that they subscribe to. So it's a problem that the industry does have to face and have to deal with, because it used to be that 3 or 4 years ago, people would subscribe to a streaming service for 3 reasons. One would be ads free, second was convenience, and third was localization, if that was a factor in your market. In Spain, for example, content available with Spanish audio. But now those conveniences are going away. If the content itself is not available in one place, then these 3 factors become less valuable. So yeah, it is a challenge. I'm afraid I do not have a simple answer, other than there's a couple of things that streaming companies are beginning to do. One is again price points, continuing to adjust the price point so the value is there from a convenience point of view. Second, what we are doing is, if we are removing some content, we are replacing it with some more content, and that's the best we can do. And that's why this year we launched sports on our platform, because we felt that the audience that we were serving, we were beginning to either get saturated in that market, or they were going elsewhere because we weren't meeting all their needs. So that's one of the reasons we introduced sports on our platform, is really to address that challenge.
Yeah, I think so it's really interesting when this type of thing comes up. I always cast my mind back to thinking about the music industry and how it had these problems and what's gone on. And I think it would be easy to say, well, technology can solve that problem, because you look at Spotify and how it took over. But I actually think the music industry's problem was that it didn't. It was very hard to kind of go and get singles economically. You wanted a song, you were forced to buy the album, and you couldn't really bring it with you effectively. Suddenly MP3s come along. There wasn't legal services that sorted out the demand to put songs on MP3s. Once there was, actually the piracy on music's gone way down versus where we anticipated it could have been, kind of inception of Napster by now, with things like Spotify, etc. When you look at the content business, I think there's a couple of things that happen here. Firstly, we've already talked about a set of things in terms of aggregation and just making that content appear in more places to bring down that friction for consumers. And I think one thing that platforms like Roku can and we do is things like Roku Pay, which is a kind of a frictionless payment service. Once users are in, their ability to either add new services, whether it be on a kind of a transactional video on demand basis or on an ongoing basis, without a huge amount of hassle on the platform. It's very straightforward once you've entered those details once. But I think the bigger thing is actually, Maria, you highlighted it here, which is around that discoverability. Lots of content is changing where it used to live. Things are disappearing from licensed windows. They're disappearing behind Plus service paywalls. If you're not a subscriber to that, and it isn't, to your point, if 7 is the magic number, if it's not in your opening 7, what do you go and do? And I think this is where we're going to start to see more of these partnerships that we've already kind of talked about some of the some kind of content overlaps with different economics in terms of the way the aggregator has, but you might be able to find that content not in one place, but it's in 2 or 3. And if you're subscribing to any one of them, you're in. And I think when we look at it from Roku, because we're sort of grounded in looking at the way that our users behave and trying to make sure the service adapts accordingly. And that's really where we got that insight around launching the Roku channel, was the amount of searching for free content, streaming, which started out as this way of getting Netflix and Prime, etc. It's actually about the way people want to watch TV. And the biggest growth sector we see in it is in free TV, which is great from an ad-supported perspective, but it causes some issues for people who are looking to be remunerated for that amazing content they put out there. So the first part is around this idea of discoverability. And on the right-hand side of the nav screen, when you boot up your Roku device, that's a prime piece of real estate that content organizations are using, and we're using through smart search to really surface the type of content that people will be interested in, either that they might not be able to find otherwise. Otherwise, we see this kind of 7-minute average choice time when people are looking for what they want to stream next. And so that's something that I think part of it is you're never going to get that down to 0. People want that opportunity to explore and to go surfing, etc., to see what they want to stream next. But there's a user experience. Some of those, they kind of know what they want, they just don't know where it is. And I think this is where the future of voice search and that functionality for discoverability for content on platforms like Roku is key for us.
I agree with that. A great answer. Two things I sort of say with my consultant hat on. I'd sort of emphasize what you're saying there around access. It's so important, but it's also really damaging if brands get too tied up in the enforcement aspect of piracy. Bearing in mind that people are already suffering from subscription fatigue, you can damage your relationship with consumers by by vilifying them. And when you're talking about music and lessons learned, I think that's one of the lessons learned. Consumers are still generally not happy with record labels based on how open and aggressive they were on anti-piracy techniques of the sort of late 90s. I want to draw down on a metric you just came up with there, Mike, if you don't mind. 7 minutes for the time for someone to make a decision. Is that across your users on the Roku platform?
Yeah, that's right. We were looking at when people turn the device on and start to engage with the platform until they start streaming. So there are some people who know exactly what they want to do, but actually, especially with the plethora of services that are now there and the amazing amounts of content, like we as a generation are probably the most fortunate in terms of the choices we have for AV entertainment in front of us. That causes a lot of people to want to search through it, and often and Maria, you highlighted it earlier, that it's the kind of the media junkies, the people who they love loads of stuff, they consume loads of stuff, they're subscribers to loads of stuff, trying to work out what is it I'm going to watch right now, when maybe the wish list has got 5 or 6 things in there. What am I going to go into? Or the other end of the spectrum, the people who they aren't subscribing to a lot of things, they're looking for that ad-supported content. They're not going into SOD environments. Is trying to work out what comes next. So this is data that comes off our platform, and actually, I think we recently saw some data from one of our competitive platforms, Samsung Ads, who were talking about their number showing nearly 9. I think from the Future of TV Advertising last week. That's the window of opportunity that content organizations have to really showcase their wares in things like those kind of ad slots and those platforms to really drive that consumer engagement and turn those kind of potential browsers into either subscribers or loyal viewers of ad-supported services.
That's an incredible amount of time. Sorry, Maria, were you about to say something?
I don't know. I was saying that even in the markets where the US, where 7 probably is the top number, consumers are also changing shopping services. So that doesn't mean that they start in January with 7 services and they were identical to how they end the year. So people are changing from one service to another. So very important is how can you keep a subscriber once you have it in your platform. Maybe rather than making everything available for binge watching, is it good to release some content on a weekly basis? That can be one strategy, as Disney Plus did with The Mandalorian. How to discover the content? Absolutely. Again, of all the panels I did this year, I would say in 40%, one of the topics was consumers cannot find the content they want, or consumers are leaving your service because they said nothing to watch. So when there are hundreds of thousands of titles available, when the consumer said there is nothing to watch, something is wrong, or they're not recommending the right content, or how is possible you subscribe in the first place and then you couldn't find anything you wanted? How can curate that content better? Not just the algorithms based on what you watch or what people around you are watching. How you have curators that can curate, personalize that experience. And it's very interesting, again, that in many markets around the world, the number of services per home is only 3. So there is still a huge potential for growth all around the world. Hence why all these services, HBO and others, they're launching in Eastern Europe, Middle East and other regions, partnering with already another streaming video. Because if they know the 7 is the top number, they want to run fast, partner with others. So we are not 2 services, now we are 1. That's why I see even more acceleration in partnerships around the world, in Eastern Europe, Middle East, Asia, even 3-4 streaming video services partnering between them. And so yes, I'm already anticipating, Jonathan, to what I see happening in 2022 is more of these partnerships, because everyone wants to be one of these top 7, especially in markets when the number is still around 3. And what can we do to not win, to keep that subscriber in with us?
So kind of drawing about 3 things together here. We've got an issue with, discoverability. I'm shocked at how high that is. We know there's an issue with discoverability, and that 7 minutes are too high. Maria, you talked a little bit about partnerships and also touched on AVOD at the start of this. If I can draw all those 3 things together into some sort of solution which has a range of curated content, limits options to a point where it's very easy to choose what to watch next, and thirdly, has an easy monetization method via AVOD. I'm of course talking about FAST channels. We know they've kind of been on the tip of everyone's tongue and talked about as an amazing new innovation that definitely isn't just a repeat of linear channels of the past. How much do we feel that these are a key, an absolutely amazing tool to solve some of these problems? And how much are they just a kind of throwback to, linear channels of the past? Are they an amazing innovation, or are they sort of a blip that's just more familiar to some viewers who remember when television came via an aerial?
Right. Well, from our point of view, look, I think discoverability, for those of us who worked in cable industry or pay television industry, discoverability was always an issue, right? Even in 90s, number one reason people were, when people were churning, they tell you the movies aren't new enough, or I can't find the content I want when you have hundreds of channels to watch from. So discoverability has always been a challenge in our industry. And I think what we're seeing now is just sort of the continuation of the same behavior from customers that we've experienced previously in cable companies and satellite companies. I think coming to the linear channels and fast channels, our experience has been that, especially on news and sports, we've seen very high consumption on it. This was our first year supporting live sports events. So we showed FIFA qualifiers. We showed the Cricket World Cup, where for Pakistan-India match, we had over 100,000 concurrent users on our service. And so for us, it's definitely been a way to bring people for sports and then engage them on entertainment and hope that they stay for entertainment. And so to us, live channels have been a way to draw in those customers that otherwise would have not subscribed to our service.
Yeah, I think we've seen the definitely a success of live. We added live again and some of the linear channels in Canada, for example, earlier this year. And I think you don't have to look too far beyond things like the Channel 4 and the amazing US Open final with Emma Raducanu in to look at that kind of success of a broader audience for that through a channel and an environment that people know. And for anybody familiar with the Thinkbox, the UK TV marketing body, they did a great piece of work a few years ago looking at need states for TV. And one of them just is around that kind of lean back, let it wash over you kind of experience. And actually linear is great for that type of thing. Really easy, very straightforward. You're not actually making any choices whatsoever. You're watching what's on. And in the kind of the app environment that streaming creates, you're forced to make a choice. Linear gets you back to a place. Those type of fast channels gets you back to a place where you don't have to make it. So it's a little bit of a throwback in terms of the way it works, but it's also the way consumers behave part of the time. So I think they've definitely got a future here.
Mm. I remember a certain colleague at FIFA describing most of TV as a screensaver for the mind, and the choice isn't something he wanted to start with, outside of course watching football. Maria, how does the development of FAST look from a holistic point of view? Where does that sit? Can you give us some thoughts on the big picture?
Yes, and not only fast channels, Jonathan. I think, again, for many years, there was the headline, linear TV is dead, the future is on demand. And how that headline was always wrong, because even every single year, including now, linear TV is the preferred way to watch content, even now. I think in the UK is 60%, in Spain is 90%. So it's not a surprise at Maaz you're saying you're having now linear channels. Even Netflix, number one on-demand service, they're creating that linear experience. So if you don't know what to watch, we can create that experience. So after a piece of content, you will have a next one. So I think also there is a fatigue on choosing all the time what you want to watch, what next. So I think the fatigue is not only in the number of services, the fatigue is also in having to select constantly. So that linear curated experience is something that consumers will value more and more in 2022 going forward.
So on that again, Maria, and I kind of want to double down on the live and specifically sports. With linear being such a sort of well designed format for things like linear sports, are you suggesting that the longevity of linear sports channels specifically is going to be far greater than other mediums that perhaps we've seen?
Okay, sports is another interesting topic, Jonathan, because again, there is disruption as well in the sports world. Like companies like DAZN, the sports online service, they're not just going after secondary rights, they're also going for the key rights in each market. We know what happened in Italy, they have Serie A. Last week, in fact, it was this week in Spain, the rights for La Liga, the key sport in Spain, is going to be distributed across Telefónica and DAZN. So even in the sports world, there is a migration to online streaming platforms. So the sports world as well is going into a lot of disruption. Hence, those companies that they buy rights, they are trying to monetize more than live sports, creating documentaries about sports, creating stories about sports legends. So streaming media companies like DAZN, they are more than distributing sports, they're also creating their own content. Again, the pandemic showed you that you cannot rely on just one type of content. Live sports was not available, so these companies have to innovate very quickly. So is sports king? It may have been, it is king, but even that can fail. So you will always need to have a plan B. So I don't know if I answered your question, lots of things around the sports, disruption, live sports versus content.
Well, Maria, and it's even more important actually for the year we've got coming up, because the end of 2022 is going to have the World Cup at peak advertising season, right slap bang in the middle of the fourth quarter. So everybody's kind of biggest ad time of the year as well is going to get amplified even further. So the winners of those sports rights, the ones who hold those broadcast rights, and their ability to strike amazing distribution deals, if there's ad-supported plays in there, it's going to be even more effective this time next year.
100%, Mike. And again, I know we don't have time, Jonathan, but we didn't speak about the role also of social media, of new sponsors, of companies like TikTok, the role they're playing as well around the sponsorships and sports and other topics, and to win new audiences. So maybe for another Webit Global Week.
I have to invite everyone back for another panel to discuss that. But yes, as Maria says, we are almost out of time here. It's flown by. Conversation's been scintillating. If I can perhaps borrow a few moments more of your time just to finish off, it would be lovely, as this is a retrospective and outlook panel, if you could leave us with something for our viewers and listeners, something for them to look out for the next few years. So your big thing, what you expect, what you know is going to happen, or something that they should be keeping an eye on to make sure they don't miss a huge market development. Maria, I'm going to start with you because you're always full of ideas.
Okay,
big thing for the future.
Big thing. Number one, as I said, partnerships, more original ones. So not just the usual partnerships streaming pay TV. It will be partnerships between streaming video companies, partnerships with games companies, with music, with devices. So different types of partnerships will happen going forward. Then companies that they were acting in video, they need new sources of revenues. We see Netflix with games, launching shopping. We have Netflix Shop as well. So they will find new sources of revenue, not just video. They will try to get money from other pies. And third, we didn't speak today, metaverse. I know it's a word that everyone is saying, but our clients, they have all asked us this question. What is the percentage of people in 2025 that they will watch content in the metaverse world?
A tiny fraction.
A tiny fraction, but I think there will be a fraction of people. Again, it's not going to be for 2022, but it's winning interest again. There's the
if you
VR
ask
headsets.
2035, I'd say 90%.
So yes, those are my predictions, and looking forward to see you all next year.
Perfect. Maaz, what's your big thing? What should people be looking out for?
I think more and more original content, because the major Hollywood studios are launching their own services. You're going to see streaming platforms doing more and more of their own original content. And I think in that regards, short form content on mainstream platforms is going to become more and more commonplace. So we're going to gradually start moving away from those, serialized TV shows that we've gotten used to. They'll definitely be there, but I think they'll be complemented with 10 to 12 minute short form content and original content coming from streaming platforms. So a good age for content creation.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And Mike, coming from a company that for many is the next big thing, do you have a next big thing on the horizon for others?
I think the big thing we'll be watching out for over the coming years is a wholesale transformation in the way that media is traded. And what I mean by that in the TV world, I'm not saying the end of the upfronts, but what I do mean is that I think in future, the buyers of TV, firstly, there'll be a lot more of them. There'll be a lot more diverse. There'll be a lot more brands who appear on the big screen because TV advertising is getting democratized beyond just those brands who are working with the biggest agency holding companies. And secondly, the control of those campaigns that appear on our screens in future won't be through the teams within the broadcasters or the streaming platforms. It'll actually be through software that's owned by the brands and the agencies themselves. They'll take far more control over the way they run those TV campaigns and link that with social elements, with digital video and display, with even metaverse. Who knows what metaverse advertising looks like, but metaverse is next. So I think that's the big thing within our industry that we'll see and will be most noticeable for the people trading it.
Perfect. And on that note, I think we'll finish. I thank you, our audience, for listening in to us for the last 45 minutes. And of course, my fantastic panelists who made this an absolute breeze. So do stick around for the rest of Webit, and I believe this is available on demand throughout the rest of the conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.